Hello guys, it's Katie and welcome back to another video. For today's video I have a tutorial for you guys. This time around it is a tutorial for fall and it is how to crochet this candy corn bee. So if you guys have seen here on my channel, I do already have a bee tutorial. This is the same bee body. This is just how to make it into a candy corn bee with the white, orange, and yellow colors, of course, for fall or Halloween, whichever you want it to be for. Now this is a free pattern that you can find on my blog, which is katiebeancreative.com, as well as you can find the ad-free PDF version of this pattern on my Etsy shop for 99¢. So if you would like to have the written out version of the pattern, you can check it out in either of those two places. But today is going to be a step-by-step tutorial for how to crochet this little guy. So with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and get into all the materials you need in order to make it, and then of course how to make it. And just so you know, all of the materials I am using in today's video will be included in the description box below for you if you would like to shop any of those items. But with that, let's go ahead and get started on what you'll need to make this little guy and then how to make him. As far as materials, of course you're going to need yarn for a candy corn bee. We're obviously using yellow, white, and orange. You can use any brand of yarn that you prefer, but for me I'm using Premier Yarn's Parfait Chunky. This orange is the color Tangerine, and then I have the color White and the color Sunshine, all in Premier Yarn's Parfait Chunky. If you would like to shop this yarn, of course it'll be linked below for you with all the other materials as well. And if you are a first-time customer for premieryarns.com, I do have a 10% off link in the description box for you guys. So that is what I'm using as far as yarn. This yarn specifically recommends an 8mm crochet hook. For Amigurumi, that is way too small. You're gonna get gaps in your project. You're gonna be able to see the stuffing through it and the eyes might fall out. All kinds of stuff you don't want to happen. So I like to use a 5mm. I've also used 6mm with this yarn. That works as well. It's really gonna depend on your preference as well as how tightly you crochet. So if you crochet pretty tight, then you might want to do like a 5.5 or a 6mm. If you crochet pretty loose, you might want to do a 5mm like I'm doing, or maybe even like a 4.5 if you're using the same yarn. If you're not using the same yarn, then of course you want to change the hook size according to the thickness of your yarn. But if you're using this yarn or something that's similar in thickness, then you can use a 5mm like I'm doing. For all my crochet plushies, I use a stitch marker. You will see the point of this as we get to crocheting, but a stitch marker is essential for me. You can use a scrap piece of yarn or even like a bobby pin or something as a stitch marker if you wanted to, but for me, I just like these little guys. Next, we also have a yarn needle or tapestry needle. It goes by multiple names, but you will need this in order to sew on the wings for the bee as well as to sew it closed. Next, I have safety eyes as well as the backs for the eyes. I get these on Amazon. You can get them at like Michael's in person, but they're way more expensive than Amazon is, so I get these in bulk on Amazon. The size I'm using here today is 14mm. Next, I have scissors, which is pretty self-explanatory. And off camera, I do have polyfill stuffing to stuff the inside, and that will be it for the materials I am using today. For now, all we're gonna need is the white yarn, the crochet hook, and the stitch markers, so I've set everything else off to the side. And we're going to start out with a magic circle. This can be one of the most complicated things in crochet, so if you are a complete beginner, especially to amigurumi, this might take a couple tries. If that's the case, that's okay. There is also the chain 2 method, which some people do instead of the magic circle or the magic ring. It goes by both names. If you cannot get the magic circle down and you would like to try that method, I will link a tutorial in the description box below for you on how to do that instead of the magic circle. But today we are doing the magic circle since that is what I prefer. And it is good to try to learn this method because most amigurumi crochet patterns you come across are going to use this method. With that though, let's go ahead and get started. I am personally using my yarn from the outside. Some people like to do a center pull with these fluffy yarns. I do not like to do that because it tends to shed even more as you try to get the yarn out of the center. So I like to take it from the outside and just unravel it as I go. So I'm gonna set the skein off to the side here, and we're just gonna work with the yarn here. So you guys know, I'll be referring to this tail end as the yarn tail, or just tail, and then this end that is attached to my ball of yarn over here, I am calling the working end. So if I say working end, it's this end. If I say tail, it's this end. And I am right-handed, by the way. So to start out with a magic circle, I place this tail over my left pointer and middle finger, and I hold it down on my middle finger with my thumb. And then I wrap this working end around the back of my fingers, and then I wrap it forward and make an X shape in the front, and then in the back, if I flip over my fingers, it should look like two parallel lines. So X this way and two parallel lines this way. To hold this working end in place, I now put it on top of my ring finger, and I kind of pinch together with my pinky finger. So this is just my method of doing it. There's also multiple ways to do a magic circle, but this is the way I have found easiest since I started crocheting. So now I'm going to flip my whole hand over, now that I have this all set up. I'm going to now grab the crochet hook, and I'm going to place it under that first loop, so this loop that's closest to my fingertips. I'm placing it under, and I'm grabbing that second loop, and pulling it under. And then once I've pulled it under, I am twisting the hook to where it is facing upward. Then I'm going to grab this working end. So I have this pinched in between my pinky finger and my ring finger. I'm grabbing, using the hook, grabbing the working end, and then I let go of everything, and I kind of re-grab it, wrapping the working end around my pointer finger now, and then holding this circle with the rest of my fingers, and I pull this working end, the second loop on my hook, I pull that under the first loop on my hook. And now we have to do our actual stitches in the magic circle. So every pattern will tell you a different amount of stitches to do in your magic circle. The most common number you'll come across though is 6, so that is what this pattern starts out with. So I'm going to go ahead and do 6 single crochets in this circle. So you want to leave this circle how it is. You don't want to move the tail out of it or anything along those lines, and you want to start crocheting into the circle. So you're going to go under both loops here and just insert your hook. And again, I'm holding my yarn, the working end, on top of my pointer finger, and then I'm pinching it with my pinky back here to have some tension so that the yarn is not super loose. And then I'm holding the circle with my other 2 fingers in the center here. So now that I'm in the circle, I'm going to grab the working end just by wrapping the yarn around the hook and then pulling it under the circle. So under those 2 loops. And then you'll have 2 loops on your hook. You're going to then yarn over, which is what this is called when we take the working end and wrap it around the hook. And as you're doing that, yarning over is going around the back of the hook and having the yarn come toward you. So yarning over and pulling this loop that I just yarned over under these 2 loops. So we're now going to place 5 more single crochets into this circle. So I'm going to show you how to do each of those. But one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that you should be doing these stitches pretty loose. Normally with amigurumi, you do want your stitches pretty tight, but not when you're doing it in the magic circle, and you're going to see why in a minute. But we're going to place the last 5 in this circle. So I'm inserting my hook into the circle, taking that yarn around the back, which is yarning over, pulling up the loop, which is just pulling it through that circle, then yarning over again around the back and pulling that loop under both loops that were on my hook. And now doing that 4 more times. So into the circle, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling under both of these loops. So that's 3 single crochets. It's kind of hard to count your stitches when you're beginning, but if you're more familiar with crochet, you might be able to see that that's 1 stitch there, and that's a 2nd stitch, and that's a 3rd stitch. So now we have 3 more to do. So we're going to insert into the circle, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, and pull under those 2. Making 4 single crochets. So again, into the circle, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. And then that makes 5. So one more time, we're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, and pull under the 2. And now that we have these 6 single crochets, you should still have a little tail here. What you're going to do is grab onto this tail and hold on to your stitches at the same time. You're going to pull them apart. So you don't want to do this too aggressively to the point where you're going to rip the yarn, but what this should do is tighten this circle. So we're going to pull this edge. And since this tail is under the stitches we just made, you're able to pull it tight. Sometimes it gets a little snagged, but I got it there. So you're able to pull it and see how this is tightening. You're able to pull it until that is fully tight and there's no gap in the center. So that's why they call this a magic circle, because you're able to pull it to where there's no gap in the center here. Now that we have made the magic circle, the final step I'm going to do here before we move on to the second round, this was round 1. Before we move on to the second round, I'm going to insert my hook into that first stitch, which was stitch number 1 that we first made. So when I'm inserting my hook, I'm going under both loops. So if you look at each stitch, there's kind of like 2 loops to it. You're going to go under both of them, which is just being under 1 stitch, versus if you did 1 loop, it'd be only the front loop or only the back loop, which is a different technique. So you want to be going under both loops anytime you're crocheting, unless the pattern says otherwise. So now that I'm under both loops, I'm going to yarn over and just pull this all the way through everything. So under the stitch as well as under the loop that was on my hook. Pull through everything. And that's called a slip stitch, which I like to do after making all the stitches in my magic circle. That way I'm starting out with a nice plain circle, versus sometimes you can have a little bit of a jagged edge if you skip that step. So that's completely optional. You technically don't have to do that. You could just start working your next round into that first stitch. But again, sometimes you have a little bit of an edge, I feel like. that I don't like the way that looks. So I start with a slip stitch, and that is just going to count as a stitch now. It's not gonna be anything separate. Now I go ahead and take my stitch marker, and I always put my stitch marker in the last stitch of each round. So that slip stitch we just made, which is right behind the hook, is going to count as the last stitch of round 1. So I'm placing it under that stitch and then just clamping it down. And that's going to stay there. And once we get to this same stitch again, we'll know we're at the end of round 2. And then we'll do it again for the end of round 3 and round 4 and so on and so forth. Now that we have the first round done, let's move on to the second round, which is increases in each stitch. So for round 1, we ended off with 6 stitches in the round. So doing an increase in each one, we will have 12 stitches by the end of round 2. So to do an increase, we're just doing 2 single crochets in the same stitch. So firstly, I want to make sure that I'm skipping where I just did that slip stitch, which is right here. So I'm skipping that stitch and I'm going to the next one here, and I'm inserting my hook again under both loops, and I'm yarning over and pulling up that loop, which is pulling it under the stitch. And then to complete that single crochet, I'm yarning over and pulling under the 2 loops. So where I only have 1 loop on my hook. Every time you finish a stitch, you will end off with just 1 loop on your hook. So now to make this an increase, I'm going to insert my hook into the same exact stitch I was just working in. So I'm not moving on to the next one yet. I am going into this same one, and I'm doing another single crochet. So I am yarning over, pulling up that loop to where I have 2 loops on my hook, and then I'm yarning over again and pulling this one under the 2 front loops there. And that makes 2 single crochets, and that is an increase because I did 2 in the same exact spot. So now we're moving on to the next spot, and this can be harder to see with this fluffier yarn, as well as when you're just not used to looking at stitches and seeing what each stitch looks like. It can be hard to tell where one stitch ends and the next one begins. So ultimately, it just is going to take practice as far as knowing where the next stitch is, but I'm going to do my best to try to point it out to you, and hopefully you can figure that out on your own project. I just stopped right here, and if I kind of wiggle this last stitch I just made, you can see it was in this hole right here. So since I'm done with my increases, I did 2 in there, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is this next gap here. Kind of spreading things out can help a little, and you can see where that next gap is. So I'm just inserting in there, and I'm yarning over and pulling that loop up. And then I'm yarning over again and pulling through the 2. And that makes 1 single crochet. So now to make it an increase, I am inserting my hook into that same spot again, then yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. So under those 2. And now we're repeating this all the way around, so we should be doing 6 increases for a total of 12 stitches. If you are new to crochet, I highly recommend making little tally marks after you make each single crochet. That way you know you have exactly 12 in this round, and then you can move on to the next one. But I'm going to do increases in all of my next ones, and I'll come back to show you the ending of this round. So again, just 2 single crochets in each stitch. And please feel free to rewind in this video and see any of these steps over and over again, however many times you need to see them. Alright, so I just did 5 of my 6 increases. my final increase is going to go where this stitch marker is. So I'm going to unclamp this stitch marker and take it out and set it off to the side. And I'm going to do my 2 increases into that stitch where the stitch marker was. So inserting, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through those 2, and then in the same stitch, inserting, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. So that makes 12 stitches for round 2. So now we're going to move on to round 3, but before we do that, I'm going to take this stitch marker again and put it in this final stitch, so stitch number 12, right behind my hook, and I'm inserting it in that stitch and then clamping it down so it stays. And now we're going to do an increase and then 1 single, and we're going to do that all the way around for round number 3. So to do an increase, again, we are going into the next stitch under both loops of that 1 stitch, and we're yarning over, so around the back of the hook, and pulling up that loop, so pulling it under the stitch. And then we have 2 loops. We're yarning over and pulling that loop under the 2. So that makes 1 single crochet. To make this an increase, we're going to do 1 more in that spot. So I'm inserting my hook into that same spot. Then I'm yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And that makes an increasing stitch. So now I'm going to do 1 singular in the next one. So inserting my hook into that next stitch, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. So that one was not an increase, so I'm moving on to the next stitch, which is an increase. So for this round, every other one we're going to have an increase and then a not increase. So I'm going to repeat this all the way around with an increase being next, so 2 in the same stitch, and then 1 singular in the next. And repeating this all the way around, and I'll show you guys once we get to the last stitches here. Alright, so we're now at the end of this round here with 2 stitches left. So I'm going to do this final increasing, which is again 2 single crochets into the same stitch. And then I'm going to remove the stitch marker and place it down, and then do 1 single, which is just 1 single crochet into that final stitch, and I'm going to place that stitch marker back into that stitch I just made right behind the hook. And once we are finished with this round, which was round number 3, there should be 18 stitches in the round. So now for round number 4, we are doing 1 increase and then 2 singles, and repeating that all the way around. So we're going into the next stitch, inserting the hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2, which creates 1 single crochet. And to make this an increase, we are inserting into that same exact stitch, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. Then for the next 2 stitches, I'm just doing 1 in each. So I've inserted my hook, I'm yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. And then onto the next stitch, I'm inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And now this is what we'll be repeating until we get to the end here. So 1 increase, which is 2 single crochets in the same spot, and then 2 singulars. So 1 and 2, and repeating that all the way around. I will come back once I have gotten to the last stitches here. Alright, so I'm now left with 3 single crochets for this round. So I'm going to do my last increase. And then the next 2 are just 1 singular. So 1 singular one right here. And then the final singular one is going to go in where the stitch marker is. So removing the stitch marker, placing that stitch, and then placing the stitch marker back. And at the end of this round, you should have 24 stitches. And this was round 4. So now we're moving on to round 5, which is going to be the last round of increases. So we're going to have 1 increase and then 3 singulars, and repeat that all the way around. So to do this first increase, I'm inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through both loops, and then I'm going into the same stitch, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. And now that I've completed this increase, I'm going into the next 3 and just doing singulars. So in the next one, 1, 2, and 3. And then we're doing an increase. So again, 2 in the same stitch. And then we're doing the 3 singulars. So 1 single crochet in each stitch for 3 stitches in a row. And repeating this again. So just like I've done for the other rounds, I will come back once I have made it back to these last few stitches. Alright, so I'm now left with 4 stitches here in this round. So I'm going to do my final increase, which is again the 2 single crochets in the same stitch. And then I have the 3 stitches left where I'm going to do 1 singular in each. So 1, 2, and the third one is going to go where this stitch marker is. So I'm removing the stitch marker, doing that final single, and then placing the stitch marker back. And at the end of this round, which was round number 5, you should have 30 stitches all the way around. And that was the last increasing round. So now we are not doing any more times where we're going to be doing 2 stitches in the same exact spot. So the next round is just singles all the way around, and we are still using white. So for round number 6, we're going to go into the first stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and that makes 1 single crochet. And again, we're not doing any increases, so we're not going into the same stitch. We're moving right along to the next stitch, inserting our hook, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2, and I am doing this all the way around until I get to my stitch marker. And again, for this round, we will have 30 stitches. same as the last round since we're not doing any increases. And once we get to this very last stitch, we will change colors. So I will see you guys once we get there. So in this final stitch of round 6 is where we're going to be changing colors. And the next color is orange. So that's what I'm going to be changing to. I'm just doing the color change in the most simple way possible since this is a beginner-friendly tutorial. So the color change will be pretty visible, as you're going to see. If you would prefer to try out a method where the color change is not visible, I can link a tutorial in the description box below for you on how to do that. But just so you guys know, I am going to do a method that is just super simple. So with that being the case, let's go ahead and change to the orange color. So I'm removing my stitch marker here. And with the white, I'm starting out just like I'm doing a regular single crochet. So I am inserting my hook into this last stitch. I am yarning over, and then I'm pulling up the loop. And this is where you want to stop and drop this white yarn. So this working end of the white yarn, you're going to drop down, and you're going to get your orange yarn. You're going to take this tail and lay it directly on top of your hook, just like you would be yarning over with the white yarn if you were going to finish the single crochet, but instead we're doing it with the orange yarn. I know the orange yarn right now seems a little bit loose. We are going to secure it later, so you do want to just leave a little bit of a tail. So once we have the orange yarn laying on top, I kind of just like to hold it down to where it's not going to slide away from me. And I'm going to pull it under the 2 white loops here to complete the single crochet. And then I'm going to pull tight on the white end of the yarn. So this is still attached to my ball of yarn. For the white, I'm going to pull tight. That way it locks that in. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my stitch marker here and place it in this last white single crochet. And now what you can do is go ahead and flip this over, and I'm placing everything down, and I'm grabbing my scissors, and I'm going to cut the white yarn, and I'm going to leave a tail for that as well, about as long as the orange tail. And then we can set the white yarn off to the side. And on the inside of the project, we're going to tie the orange and the white tails together. So I just do this 2 to 3 times to secure the color change. So here's 1 and 2 times. And again, this will be on the inside of the project, so nobody's going to be able to see that. So I've tied that together twice. And now I'm grabbing everything again, and I'm just going to start crocheting with the orange yarn. So now for rounds 7 through 11, which is 5 rounds. So 5 times that you're going to come to this stitch marker, do another stitch, place it back. 5 times of that is how many times we're going to do with this orange yarn. And there's no increases, just 1 singular stitch in each one. So you should have 30 stitches for every single time you get back to this stitch marker. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that off camera. Again, it is 5 rounds, starting with round 7 and ending with round 11. If you are more of a beginner and it's hard for you to count your rounds, then I would suggest making a tally mark every time you get to this stitch marker. That way you're able to keep track of how many you've done. So I'm going to do this off camera for, again, rounds 7 through 11, 5 times total. And then once I come back, we're going to place the eyeballs and change to yellow. So I'm here at the end of round 11, and this is with 1 stitch remaining. I'm going to stop right here in order to place the safety eyes. So what I'm going to do is pull up on my crochet hook to make this loop wider. And then I'm going to take the crochet hook out. And now we're going to place the safety eyes, and then we'll come back to do the color change to yellow. The eyes are going to go in the front here. So you want this color change to be on the bottom. I mean, at least that's what I prefer. Technically, you could do it either way. But I'm going to keep this color change area here on the bottom. So my eyes are going to go up here to make this the bottom. I have one eye here. I like to place them between rounds 3 and 4. So if you can count here, this is 1, 2, 3. So there's 3. If I place it between 3 and 4, it goes right there. You could also do between 4 and 5, which I might actually do this time because these are a little bit bigger safety eyes. The original pattern I wrote with, I think, like 10mm eyes, so then I had them a little closer. But I think with the bigger safety eyes, I like them farther apart. So that just goes to show you that it's kind of just personal preference and like up to whatever size you're using. But now I put them between rounds 4 and 5, so I want to make sure on the other side I'm doing that as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, between 4 and 5 is right there. So this is the distance apart that I'm going to do. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 stitches apart. There's really no need to count how many stitches apart and everything, because that's a little bit hard to do, especially like I've been mentioning, if you're not used to really counting your stitches or anything, it's a little bit hard to do that. You can really just place the eyes wherever you think they look best, and you do want to just look at it from every angle before we put the backs on, because it's pretty much impossible to get the backs off. So once they're on, they are on. So I'm gonna put them at this angle, I think, but I do want to just take a look at what this would look like if I put that down by a little bit more. I think I actually like it down a little more like that. So I do just like to play with it sometimes just to see, and you have to imagine there's going to be 2 wings up here. So now is when I'm going to go ahead and put on the backs. So we're going to flip this outward, keeping the eyes where they currently are. I'm going to take each back and just go ahead and place them on. Every back is a little bit different, but for these ones they're pretty easy to put on. So I just place them on there and then push down. You can kind of feel that it locks into place. So that's what I'm doing for these ones. And sometimes you even get that click that you just heard. So you just want to make sure they're on there as far down as they can go. Make sure those things aren't going to fall out. And if your stitches are loose, that's when it's more likely to fall out, versus my stitches here are pretty tight, as you can see. Like, you don't see my hand that's inside it or anything. So these eyes are secure, versus if my stitches were really loose, the whole thing could come out with the back on it still. Just a little tip for you there, and reasoning why you want to have a tighter hook size than what it recommends. But anyways, now that we've placed the eyes, we're gonna move on to switching colors to yellow. Alright, so I've flipped back around to where we ended off, and I've got this big loop here, so I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook, and then I'm going to pull on the working end of the yarn to tighten it around my hook. And now we're going to remove this stitch marker and insert into this stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, and then leave those 2 loops how they are. Drop the orange yarn and go ahead and grab your tail of the yellow yarn and place that on top. Again, kind of holding it back here and leaving a little bit of a tail back here as well. And then we're going to pull this yellow yarn underneath the 2 orange loops. And then we'll put that stitch marker back in that last orange loop. And now we'll flip it to the inside, and we can pull tight on that orange yarn in order to tighten where we did that color change. And I set the hook down here so that I can cut the orange yarn, again leaving a little bit of a tail so we can tie the 2 tail ends together here. And now we're going to tie those together just like we did for the other color change, like 2 or 3 times. And now that we have this color change, we're going to continue doing single crochets around for rounds 12, 13, and 14. So for the next 3 rounds, we are again just doing single crochets all the way around, no increases or anything along those lines. So it will be 30 for each round, and we're doing this 3 times. So once I get here, I'm gonna do it 2 more times. So I'll come back to you guys once I'm at the end of round 14. So this is the end of round 14, and I have 1 more single crochet to place here. So I'm going to remove the stitch marker and go ahead and place that. And then I am placing the stitch marker back. So round 15 through 18 are our last final rounds, and it's kind of the reverse order of what we did for the increases, except we'll be decreasing. So for round 15 here, we are starting out with a decrease and then doing 3 single crochets. So for the decreases, I'm going to show you how to do an invisible decrease because I feel like it's just as easy as doing a regular decrease and it's not as noticeable. So that's the technique I'm going to show you, but if you already know how to do a regular decrease and that's what you prefer, then you can go ahead and do that. But for an invisible decrease, we're going to start out by inserting our hook into only that front loop of the first stitch. So normally you would go under both loops like that, but for the decrease, we're going to go under just the first one. And then we're gonna do the same exact thing in the stitch next door. So we're keeping this loop on the hook and maneuvering the hook to go under that front loop of the stitch next door. And then we're going to yarn over, we're going to pull through both of those front loops that our hook is currently under. Sometimes it's easier to do 1 loop at a time, so that's what I'm doing here. And then we'll have 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull this loop under the 2 loops there. So that has created 1 invisible decrease. So now I'm going to do 3 singular crochets. So in the next one, which make sure you're not accidentally going into one of the stitches that we just did the decrease in. Again, like the increases, you can kind of wiggle it and see this is the final stitch that I did the decrease in. So this next stitch here is where I'm doing the single. So I'm going under both loops, just like normal for a single. Then I'm yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And then for the next stitch, I'm doing the same thing. So under both loops, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And then we have 1 more single in this next stitch here. So under both loops, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And now we're going to do a decrease, and then again 3 singles, and repeat that all the way around. So let me show you 1 more time. So again, we're going in the front loop only of that next stitch to start the decrease. And then with our hook still in this spot, we're going in the front loop of the next stitch And now that we're under both of those front loops, we're going to yarn over and pull under those 2 front loops. And then we're going to yarn over and pull under both of those loops. And that has created another invisible decrease. So now we're doing 3 singulars on their own. And I am repeating this all the way around. So I just did 3 singles. So now I'm doing another decrease and then another 3 singles after that. And that's what I'll be doing until I get back to the stitch marker. So I now have 5 stitches left here for this round. So I'm going to do my final decrease for this round, which is again into the front loop of the next stitch and then the front loop of the stitch after that. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull under both of those front loops. Then I'm going to yarn over again and pull under both of those loops. And now we have 3 singulars to do on their own. So I'm doing those here, so that was 2. And now I'm removing the stitch marker and doing the 3rd and final stitch right there. And now I'm placing that stitch marker back. So at the end of that round, you should have 24 stitches since we did 6 decreases. So now for round 16, we are starting out with another decrease. So I'm going into the front loop of this first stitch and then into the front loop of the stitch next door. And I'm yarning over and pulling under both of those front loops. And now with the 2 loops on my hook, I'm yarning over again and pulling this new loop under the 2 previous loops there. And now for this round, we're doing 2 singulars and then another decrease and 2 singulars. So I just did that decrease, again making sure I'm not going into the same stitch on accident. I'm moving on to the next stitch, inserting my hook under both loops, yarning over and pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2, and then into the next stitch, inserting my hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over and pulling through 2. So now I'm repeating this all the way around, again doing a decrease, so into the front loops of the next 2 stitches, yarning over, pulling through the front loops, yarning over, pulling through 2, and then I'm doing 2 singular stitches. And I'm repeating this around. Now I'm to the point where I have 4 stitches left for this round, so I'm doing that final decrease again into the front loops of those next 2 stitches, then yarning over, pulling through those front loops, yarning over and pulling through 2. Then I have 1 single crochet to place here, and 1 more where the stitch marker is, so I'm removing the stitch marker and placing this final single crochet for this round, which is round 16. And at the end of this round here, you should have 18 stitches. So now really quick, I'm going to take a break to go ahead and stuff this guy. So what I'm going to do is pull up on my crochet hook, just like I did when I was adding the safety eyes. I like to have a long loop here, that way in case I accidentally pull on this working end, it's not gonna unravel on me as I am stuffing. So pull this loop up and then set my hook down. So for adding stuffing, I just like to grab a little bit of stuffing at a time and go ahead and start packing it in, going all the way to the front. And you want to pack it in there pretty firmly, but of course it's also just personal preference. So some people like theirs to have a little less stuffing, so it's a little more squishy. Some people like theirs to be a little more structured. Whatever you prefer. And you don't have to add all the stuffing right now. We will add a little bit more as we close it. Because if you add too much towards the end here, you can kind of get stuck in your hook as you're crocheting and whatnot, which can be a little annoying. So I like to just do a good base of stuffing, and then I will add a little bit more stuffing as we continue to close up this hole. And I also like to look at it from the front and just make sure it's looking proportional. You don't want to get like too much stuffing in one area and it have like a lump or something. So I'm adding just a little bit more stuffing here, and then I'm going to stop for now and I'll add more later on. Alright, so now that I have added the amount of stuffing I wanted, I'm going to go ahead and put my hook back on this loop here and pull on the working end in order to tighten that loop. And now we have 2 more rounds. So this is round 17, and we're going to do a decrease and then 1 singular and repeat that all the way around. So again, for a decrease, we are going into the front loop of the first stitch and then the front loop of the stitch next door. And then we are yarning over and pulling this loop under the front loops of those stitches. Then we're yarning over and pulling under those 2 loops. So that creates 1 decrease. Now we're doing 1 singular, making sure we're going into the next stitch over, inserting under both loops, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, and pulling through 2. And now we're repeating this all the way around, so I'll come back to you guys once I have reached the stitch marker. Alright, so now I'm left with 3 single crochets, so I'm doing my decrease first, and then I am removing this stitch marker and doing this last single crochet here. And I'm placing this stitch marker back. And now at the end of this round, which was round 17, you should have 12 stitches left. So now for round 18, which is the final round, we're just doing decreases all the way around. So that should be 6 decreases. So again, a decrease going into the front loop of the first stitch, and then the front loop of the stitch next door. Then we are yarning over, pulling under those front loops, yarning over and pulling through the 2, and we're repeating that all the way around. So into the front loop of the next stitch, and then the front loop of the stitch after that. Then we are yarning over, pulling through those, and then yarning over and pulling through those. And repeating this all the way around until I get back to that stitch marker. So now I have 2 stitches left, the last one being where this stitch marker is. So I'm going to remove this stitch marker and go ahead and place the final decrease right here. And once you've done this, you should have 6 stitches in this round. So now I'm going to fasten off or finish off. It is called both, but it's the same technique. So I'm going to leave a tail. You want a little bit of a tail so that we can sew this bottom closed. So I'm going to grab my scissors here and leave maybe like 2 to 3 inches for the tail. Doesn't need to be super long. We're going to cut that there. And then, as you notice, I left my hook still in this loop. So I'm going to yarn over with this yarn now that it's cut off. And I'm going to just pull all the way through until this loop here comes out, and I'm going to tighten until it is fully tight. I got some little yarn fuzzies here after doing that, so I'm going to remove those. And if you would like to place any more stuffing in this little hole, you can. I'm going to place just a little more kind of around the center of it to make sure it has a nice round structure. So just a little bit, like I'm not using very much at all. And I'm placing this in here. You can also use the end of your crochet hook. Sometimes that's a little bit easier in order to get the stuffing in the small holes. So just a little more stuffing like that, I think, is all I'm gonna do. And now is where we're going to sew this hole closed. So for this, you will need the yarn needle. So we're just going to take this yarn tail and place it on the yarn needle. In order to do this, I find the easiest way to be pinching the yarn tail, sort of like that, and then you can place the yarn through the eye of this needle a lot easier than if you were trying to do the edge here, because the edge can kind of fray. So if you get it through like this, then you can pull on that little bit and leave a little bit of a tail out of the needle. And then we're going to flip over and we're going to sew it closed. So in order to do this, we're just going to go back and forth. I am going into only the back loop here of the final stitches that we just made. So the last decrease I made was right here into this stitch. So I'm going to the next stitch and I'm going from the inside toward myself. So the inside to the outside, and I am placing my needle into that front loop, and I'm going to pull all the way until the yarn gets tight. So just like that. And then I'm rotating so I can see better, and I'm placing into the back loop of the stitch next door, but this time I'm going the opposite direction, so I'm going away from myself. And then again doing this until it gets tight. And then I'm doing that for the next stitch as well, but this time I'm going toward myself. So we're going back and forth, toward ourselves, then away from ourselves. So now toward myself, into that loop there, and pull until it's tight. And then I'm doing this 6 times total because there was 6 stitches left at the end here. So you want to do that in all 6 of the stitches. Just back and forth for these 6 times total. And after this 6th one, you can go ahead and just pull tight. Again, with everything, you don't want to pull too tight to where it's going to rip the yarn, but you want to pull tight to where that hole closes up. And then what I like to do to secure this a little better, I'll go back and forth through a couple stitches. So I kind of just poke my needle in here and push it out wherever it comes. You want it to stay in this yellow area since we're using yellow yarn. If you poked it all the way through to the orange or the white, you might be able to see the yellow. So you don't want that, but just poke it somewhere in this yellow yarn and pull this direction, and then I'm going to go the other direction one time as well. So I'm just kind of going right into the stitch next door and pushing through until it comes out the other side and pulling until that little loop gets tight. And I'll do it just one more time to be on the safe side and make sure that end is secure. Since it's the inside of the plushie, nobody can see it, so we're just kind of hiding that tail while also securing it. And then if you have a really long tail, what you can do is go ahead and cut. You want to cut close to the plushie, but you don't want to be like super close to where you're going to accidentally cut your stitches. So I'm going to cut it and just leave a little bit of a tail there, like that. And then I'm going to remove my tail from the yarn needle here. And this I honestly will just use as stuffing scraps later on, so I'll just add it to my polyfill box. And with this little tail here, I take the back end of the yarn needle and I just use that to poke it directly back into where it's coming out of. So just that little end there, back in. And that is the body of this candy corn bee completed. So now we just need to make 2 wings and then sew them on. For the wings, we're going to be using white yarn, and you will be making 2 of these, but I'm only going to make 1 of them on camera, and then I'll do the other one off camera since they are the same exact thing. So when you're ready to go ahead and make the second one, you can just repeat this part of this tutorial. So I'm again doing a magic circle. I'll show you really quickly how to do that again, but if you need a refresher, you can always go back to the beginning of this video where I showed more in detail how to do it. To start out, I'm laying the tail of the yarn over my pointer finger and my middle finger, and then I am pinching the tail in between my thumb and my ring finger, and I am wrapping around the back of the hook with the working end, and I'm making an X shape in the front, and then bringing this working end down. I am going to place it on top of my ring finger and pinch down with my thumb. Then I'm going to flip my hand over, and I should have 2 parallel lines here. I'm going to take my crochet hook, lift up on the first line that's closest to the fingertips, grab that second loop, wrap around, and then slide everything off my fingers and readjust to where I'm holding the yarn how I like, which is wrapped around my pointer finger, and then holding the rest of the circle with the rest of my hand. And I'm now going to yarn over and pull through to make 1 little chain. Then working in the circle, I'm going to do 6 single crochets just like we did for the body. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through those 2 loops. And we're doing that 5 more times for a total of 6. Again, making sure you do this kind of loose. So into the circle, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull through 2, into the circle, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and that is 3 total single crochets. So now doing that 3 more times, insert the hook, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And I'm going to do that 2 more times here for a total of 6 single crochets in this magic circle. Now I'm going to grab onto this tail and hold on to my stitches at the same time and pull them apart in order to tighten the circle. So now just pulling this the rest of the way to where it's fully tightened and there's no gap in the center. And then I'm going to insert my hook into that first stitch under both the loops, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through everything in order to create that slip stitch, which makes the nice circle for us to work with. And I'm grabbing my stitch marker and putting it in that slip stitch, which is going to count as our last stitch of round 1. So that was round 1. And now for round 2, we are going to increase in each one. So this is exactly like how we did the body, increasing in each one to give us a total of 12 stitches. So again, an increase, we're going under both loops of the first stitch, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through the 2 loops, then into the same stitch because we're doing increases, yarning over, pulling up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2. So I'm doing that a total of 6 times, and I'll show you on the final time once we're at the stitch marker. So I went ahead and removed the stitch marker from that final stitch. So now I'm just going to place the 2 single crochets in that final stitch to do that increase. And now I am placing the stitch marker back. And now we are on to round 3, which is going to be again the same as the body, and it's just going to be an increase and then 1 single. Now that I've done this increase, it's going to be 1 single in the next. So again, under both loops, yarn over, pull up the hook, yarn over, and pull under both those loops. And then it will be all the way around, repeating that. So we have an increase, which is again 2 in the same stitch, and then 1 single, and repeating this all the way around. So now I have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to do my final increase in this next one, and then for the final stitch I'm removing that stitch marker, placing that single crochet, and then putting the stitch marker in that stitch I just made. At the end of this round you should have 18 stitches, and we're going to do one more round for these little wings, and that is all single crochets all the way around. So there'll be 18 single crochets, no increases or anything, just 18 single crochets, 1 in each. So inserting the hook, yarning over, pulling up the loop, yarning over, pulling through 2, and then moving on to the next stitch and doing that same thing 18 times total. And now for this final stitch, I am removing the stitch marker and placing that final single crochet. And the next step is to fasten off, but I don't really like there to be such a sharp edge. So what I actually will do is do just 1 slip stitch into the next stitch. So that's just inserting and then pulling through everything, and that kind of gives more of a flat circular edge, just like we do for starting with the magic circle. It just gives kind of more of a circle shape. So that is what I did right there. And now I'm going to place this down and I'm going to finish off. So I am leaving a longer tail this time than we did for the body, because you'll use this tail in order to sew this wing onto the body. So I'm gonna leave at least like a 6-inch tail, I'd say this is, if not a little longer. It's always better to have more than you need than to not have enough. So a pretty long tail. This is probably way more than I'll need, but just in case. And now that I've done that, I'm just going to yarn over and pull through everything just like we did for the body to fasten it off. And this is it for the little wing. So you'll want to repeat this over a second time in order to get the second wing. And once I've done that, I will come back and give you directions on sewing the wing onto the bee. So I have my 2 bee wings here, and all we're gonna need now is the yarn needle, the 2 wings, and obviously the bee body. But before we even need the bee body, I'm going to do one thing to each of these wings, and that is taking this center tail where we started off, and I'm going to kind of tuck that in to each one of these wings. So what I do, I'm doing this from the back side, which is technically where the tail comes out of. Normally this is the back side and this is the front side of your plushie. So this back side is what we're gonna sew downward, and then this other side will be facing up. So I'm taking this center tail and I've already put it on my needle, and I'm going to weave it through and to the outside. And I'm headed in the direction of where I finished off so that the two tails will kind of be right next to each other. So all I'm doing is going through each stitch until I make it up here. So I'm doing this and then I'm pulling all the way through, and then I'm just taking it off my needle here. That way when we sew down the wing, sometimes this little piece comes up. You won't see a random string hanging down. So I'm going to do that on the other wing as well. This is just a personal preference thing because I don't like to see that little string underneath the wing. And I feel like it also just secures it a little better. So again, just pushing through until this comes out the other side. And now I'm going to put the longer end of one of the wings. It doesn't matter which one, they're both the same. Putting the longer end on my needle, and I'm going to start working with this. So first, again, before I even touch the bee body, I like to attach the two wings together. Because personally for me, I don't like there to be a gap. Some people, when they make a bee, they'll sew the wings and kind of leave a gap. I prefer to have them together, so I like to actually sew them together first and then sew them on. So again, this is just my preference. If you like to have a little gap whenever you make a bee, if you like there to be a little gap in between the wings, you could sew each one on individually, but I'm first going to attach the wings together. So to do that, I am putting the two wings together and just kind of holding them together. I'm going to take this tail, it's coming from this wing here, so I'm going to insert it into the other wing, just in one of the top stitches, it doesn't really matter which one, and I'm pulling through to attach them. I do like to do this to where all the ends, all the tail ends are going to be here in the center. Again, because this is all going to be on the bee body, so you won't see these tails dangling around, if that makes sense. And we're going to tuck them in anyway. But anyways, I've gone into this wing, so now going into the same wing and then back through the other one, I'm going to the next stitches, and I'm going to do this probably one more time after this. So here's that, and then one more time the stitch next door, so we're doing like 3 stitches, and through here. I'm actually going to do that one more time. I said 3 times, but I lied. I'm going to do a 4th time. That way these can be attached nicely, and instead of going in like this and coming out the front of it, this time I'm going to do this one in towards the back so that I can start sewing onto the bee body in a moment. So now that these are attached to one another, I'm going to start attaching the wings to the body. So you want to make sure that this is centered with the eyes. So I'm going to do my best to line that up. Kind of even going to squish my bee down on the table here so that I can see what he's looking like. And then once I'm happy with where he's at, I'm going to just start going into the actual bee body. So I'm just disregarding all these tails for now. And I'm gonna go into the bee body, sort of at the base of the wings, and then I'm coming out at the front of the wings here. And I'm gonna grab at the front of the wings and stick my needle in there. And then I'm gonna come back down through the other wing. There's really no like exact method to sewing things on. This is just the way I'm doing it, and then I kind of go back and forth until it feels secure in the middle, and then we will do a little bit on each side as well. So I'm going back into the wings on the back side here. And then I'm going into the bee body and back out to the front, just like we did earlier. And then back into the wings. And back into the body. And then I am actually poking this out of the center of the wings, as you can see. Just to kind of secure right there. And then I'm gonna poke it back in. And out again. So now that I've gone back and forth with that a few times, I'm gonna secure underneath the wings, because if you can tell, these are kind of floppy. You could leave it like that if you want, but I like to kind of secure just about right here, so it kind of stays down a little more, if that makes sense. So my tail is still long enough for me to do that, so I'm gonna continue to use this tail that I have going on. But if you are starting to run out of the tail you were using, you could move on to one of these other longer tails. So now I'm going to poke this back into the body where it's kind of coming out. And I'm going to bring it through to about midway where I want the wing to lay. I'm going to poke it through. And then I'm going to take my needle and go under the back side of the wing here, just like in the center. And I'm going to pull it through until it gets tight. And then you could pull it down tight onto the body. And then poke it back into the body. And then this way the wing kind of sits a little flatter compared to this one that is like coming up on its own, if that makes sense. So this wing, it comes up a little, like it looks like the bee could fly, but it doesn't feel like the wing is gonna just come off on its own because it's not secure, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do this probably 2 more times, like right here, and then I'm gonna do this on the other wing as well. So I'll show you here. I'm gonna go into the wing again, the back part of the wing, and pull that all the way through, and then I'm gonna go back into the body, and then I'm gonna poke this through to where it comes out up here, and then I'm going to secure by going through the back side of the wing up here towards the front, and then pull on that. And then I'm going to tuck this in again. And now I'm gonna be done with this tail because it's starting to fray on me, as you can see, and I still have this long tail left. So I'm gonna use this other tail for this wing to secure it down. But for this side, I am done, and I'm done with this tail. So I'm just going to take the yarn needle, just like we did for closing up the bee, and I'm going to just poke this into the body until it's hidden. So just poke that in until it's hidden, and then I'm gonna secure this other side of the bee off camera. But before I do that, actually, I'm gonna poke in these smaller tails that I'm not gonna be using for any sort of sewing. I'm gonna poke them in kind of under the wings as well. That way these aren't gonna just randomly pop out because the wings will be sewn on top of them. So I'm gonna use this tail to secure this wing on this side, and then I will show you the final product. Alright, so here's the final product of the little candy corn bee. If you guys would like to make a regular bee, I do already have a tutorial for that, and it is the same style and everything. The only difference is when you're doing the color changes, and then of course it's yellow and white instead of orange, white, and yellow. But this is the final product for the little fall Halloween version of this bee. Alright you guys, thank you so very much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you were able to make your own little candy corn bee for the fall. If you were able to make your own and you end up sharing any pictures on social media, please do tag me. I would love to see and reshare your candy corn bees. I am at Katie Being Creative anywhere. Please feel free to tag me if you make this bee or any of my other patterns as well, because I would love to see them. Now if you guys do want to make a regular bee or even a bat, I also have a tutorial for that, which is perfect for Halloween time. Or I have a couple other tutorials like a little mushroom or a chili pepper. And I also have a cow tutorial, and I have quite a few more coming in the future as well. So make sure you guys stay tuned for those. And again, if you wanted to shop any of the materials I used in today's video, those are all included in the description box below for you. But with that, that's all I have for you guys today, so thank you very much for watching. Again, if you enjoyed, please do give it a thumbs up. It helps let YouTube know, as well as let myself know that you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more tutorials from me. And by letting YouTube know that you enjoyed, it's going to push this video out to more people, which will also hopefully enjoy making their own little candy corn bee. Also, if you enjoyed this video, then you're more than likely going to enjoy other videos here on my channel, so make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and you can turn on the post notification bell in order to be notified whenever I do post a new video here on my channel. And finally, if you would like to check out anything else from me, everything is at Katie Being Creative, whether you want to check me out on social media, or if you want to follow my Etsy shop for more of these crochet patterns, or if you want to see my blog, again, that is katiebeingcreative.com, where there are other free crochet patterns. But with that, thank you again very much for watching, and I hope to see you guys here in the next one. Goodbye!